Julian has a special task, a calling, that can turn him into a true god. But there's a twist. Vincent doesn't seem too interested in Julian's achievements. He's got a new life to live, busy with adventures and excitement. You might think being a ghost is cool, but Julian's got a problem. His spiritual energy is running low, and if it disappears, Vincent's life is in danger. Vincent's not convinced, though. He looks pretty healthy for a guy facing an early demise. But oh no, just as he raises his doubts, Vincent collapses to the ground. It's a shocker. From this moment on, Julian takes charge. He's got a plan to show Vincent real memories, ones that reveal how he was treated like dirt. Julian's keen eyes catch something in Vincent's expression, a glint of revenge maybe. It turns out, while Vincent played the coward, he was brewing thoughts of payback, not the kind of stuff a 13-year-old would dream up. When Vincent wakes up, Julian's ready to talk. He wants to know if Vincent's ready to listen now. The mysteries deepen as Julian drops names. Archdemon Davin and Hero King Cajun. Imagine Vincent's surprise. These dudes are from 500 years ago. Davin, a one-armed swordsman, broke free from a prison and made a demonic deal to become super strong. But wait, how did he leap 500 years into the future? It's like a riddle, and Vincent's scratching his head. More puzzles pile up. Davin and Cajun share the same bloodline, the Samian family. But here's the twist. Vincent's pretty sure he died in that Samian prison in his past life. The Samian family, though, ditched the one-armed man and went with the storm sword instead. This sword became a big deal, even called the Emperor's Sword. But wait, Julian spills the tea. The stories about Davin and Cajun being the Demon King and hero, all fabricated, a big old lie. That's not the end of it. Julian's got more tricks up his sleeve. He claims Cajun was Davin's best bud. Imagine Vincent's blood boiling. It's all so fishy. Julian keeps digging. Was Vincent someone from that time? Julian chuckles, saying the stories are a mashup of what the winners wanted folks to remember. And guess what? There's more history lessons. The king and his BFF, the Sun Sword Emperor, teamed up to defeat Davin. And here's the kicker. That Emperor Arslan is Vincent's ancestor. Shocked much? But it gets crazier. Arslan was a young child who looked up to Davin. He even visited Davin in prison. Arslan, who felt really bad about what happened to his friend Davin. He promised Davin he'd help him get his honour back. But strangely, after saying those strong words, Arslan didn't visit Davin again. Then, this other person named Julian mentioned something interesting about a guy named Arslan. Julian said Arslan was the first leader of a family called the Adenkas. They had a big task to do with their lives. It had to do with something Julian did a long time ago. He talked about facing a different family, the Samians, and discovering the truth. Julian thought Arslan must have told him about finding the truth. He knew how they had treated Davin unfairly. Then, Vincent, who was part of this story too, wondered if Julian could become a true god by doing something special. Julian said yes, and that would help Davin too. Julian could pass on a blessing to Davin, making him the real owner of Vincent's body. Vincent thought it was a good deal for both of them. Vincent got all determined and said he'd take on the mission Arslan left behind. He wanted to beat the Samian family who had betrayed him. Julian joked around with Vincent, calling him old because he was from 500 years ago. Vincent was curious about the kind of fighting skills people used back then. He wondered if they were better now, after so much time had passed. Vincent also wanted to know how strong the descendants of Cajun had become, but suddenly he started feeling really tired and weak. His body just wasn't doing well. Vincent realized he needed to use something called mana to control his body properly. After some meditation, he felt a flow of this mana stuff. He called out to Julian, a bit frustrated, and asked why he didn't learn to use a sword back when he had a different body. Julian explained that he had a problem and couldn't learn to use a sword, but Vincent told him that he had something called the heavenly exoskeleton, which should have helped him learn. Vincent explained that with this heavenly exoskeleton thing, he could store mana in his bones. It made him way stronger than a regular person. Julian still didn't get it, so Vincent tried to explain it better. He said that this special thing made it possible to have endless mana power, which is super important for fighters. Then Vincent mentioned something really cool. Cajun, who everyone called a hero, also had this heavenly exoskeleton. It was kind of funny and strange at the same time. Davin, who used to be his friend, was now in a body that was like Cajun's. But the world 500 years later was different than what Davin had imagined. In a memory, Julian said something about not being able to link imagery to the heart. Vincent was confused about what that meant. Julian explained that it was about storing mana in the heart. Vincent still didn't fully understand, so Julian said it was like saving special energy in a certain way. Vincent wondered about a meditation method. He thought about Falca, the first leader of the Aninka family. He had a really good way of meditating to store mana in the heart. In the time of Julian, a long time ago, They didn't store mana in regular ways like we do with batteries or in our bodies. Nope, they had a special way. They put the mana into these things they called imagery, and each one was like a shiny star. The more stars they used, the stronger the martial artist would become. Back then, they didn't put mana in their bodies because it was dangerous. They didn't even write down how they did it. People made imagery so they wouldn't get hurt by putting mana in their hearts. A long time ago, more than half of the martial artists who tried that way exploded. Yikes! But there's a brave guy named Vincent. He's got a really strong heart, so he decided to put the mana in there. He wants to be a real martial artist, but it's risky. Davin learned to do it too, even with just one arm. He's really tough. But then, Julian interrupts Vincent. He notices mana flowing all around, like invisible rivers. Julian talks about something called a circuit formula. It's like a secret recipe to use mana better. But back in Davin's time, they just touched things to use mana, and not everyone succeeded. More than half of them didn't make it. So Julian tells Vincent to take it easy and treat his body right like a treasure. And yeah, our bodies are precious. Julian did something really brave too. He used his own body to store mana, even though he had this cool thing called a heavenly exoskeleton. It sounds fancy, but it's like a magic bone structure. It needs mana to work, and Julian's exoskeleton was hungry for over 13 years. That's a really long time. If it keeps going like that, Vincent's body might not make it to adulthood. Later on, Vincent meditates. It's like a peaceful magic time out. He knows it'll help his body, but there's a limit to how much it can help. Maybe only 10 more years, which sounds like a lot, but it's not really. In that time, the Storm Sword might become super powerful, and Davin with one arm might be forgotten by everyone. Those 10 years must have been so scary for Davin, all alone and hungry for life. Then there's a knock on the door. Guess who? It's Wilson, Vincent's servant. He asked Wilson if he could fetch him some fresh, clean clothes. Wilson was taken aback, his eyes widening as he noticed that Vincent appeared stronger and more determined than usual. His curiosity got the better of him, and he couldn't help but ask Vincent what he had been up to lately, as his room seemed to be in a chaotic state. In Wilson's mind, thoughts raced like lightning. He wondered if Vincent had been dabbling in dark magic or some mystical arts. Maybe he should inform the Grand Chamberlain and report this strange behaviour to the head of their noble family. The mere idea made Wilson's heart race. Vincent's steps were slow and deliberate as he moved closer to Wilson. His voice carried a hint of threat as he reminded Wilson of his role as a servant, a role that required carrying out tasks, even the ones he didn't particularly fancy. Vincent's words were firm, making it clear that he expected Wilson to do his job without hesitation. But Wilson was no pushover. His hesitation showed in his eyes, a mix of defiance and reluctance. He was a servant, yes, but he wasn't keen on doing anything he didn't feel like doing. Vincent's presence loomed over him, reminding him of his place. Vincent's patience dwindled, and he decided to escalate the situation. He mentioned the big chamberlain Wilson had spoken of earlier, someone who could provide the clean clothes he needed. Vincent's tone conveyed that he was done waiting, and his actions hinted that he was willing to take matters into his own hands if needed. The mention of the big chamberlain had an unexpected effect on Wilson. Suddenly a fire was lit beneath him. His pride as a servant was stirred, and he felt a renewed sense of duty. He would prove himself capable. He would clean the room and get those clothes for Vincent. There was no way he would allow himself to be labelled as cowardly or insensitive. As Wilson went about his tasks, Julian, another onlooker, shared his thoughts. He believed that Vincent's current behaviour was deliberate, a test perhaps. Vincent was the 7th young Lord of Adventist after all, and this could be a way for him to showcase his ability to handle a defiant servant. Julian also revealed a startling piece of information about Wilson, that he used to be a part of a gang and had even taken lives. But Vincent was sceptical. He had a keen sense for these things, and he couldn't feel any malevolent energy from Wilson. He believed that Wilson was not the ruthless killer Julian portrayed him to be. Vincent's conviction stemmed from his own life experiences. He had walked a path that exposed him to the harsh realities of the world, and that gave him a unique perspective on people's true natures. Julian was taken aback by Vincent's certainty, fearful of what kind of power he might possess. Julian's fears were rooted in the unknown, as he had no idea that the body Vincent inhabited was that of Davin himself. A shiver ran down his spine at the thought of who had actually summoned. Meanwhile, Wilson had completed his chores, and something had changed. He found himself more compliant, more willing to follow Vincent's lead. Vincent's next request caught Wilson off guard, a wooden sword, 1 metre in length and made of dark, fragrant wood. There were supposedly many such swords in the family warehouse. Wilson hesitated, not eager to comply. He reasoned that if this was truly important, Vincent should go himself. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps.